My son sent me a message I never expected to read. It was early, just after sunrise. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee warming my hands, the house quiet in that peaceful way it always is before the day begins. When my phone buzzed, I smiled without thinking. I assumed it was a photo of my grandchildren. Maybe Noah missing another tooth. Maybe Lily holding up one of her crooked drawings. Instead, I read this: "Don't rely on me when you're old. I have my own life and family." I read it once, then again, then I set my phone down very carefully on the counter. I didn't cry, I didn't call him, I didn't argue or ask what he meant. I simply took a slow breath and said nothing. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. If stories about family, boundaries, and quiet strength resonate with you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It truly helps more people hear stories like mine. And if you feel comfortable, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I read them all. Now let me tell you what happened next. That message didn't just hurt. It clarified something I'd been avoiding for a long time. You see, when your own child tells you not to rely on them, they aren't just talking about the future. They're telling you how they already see you, not as a mother, not as a person, but as a potential burden, a problem they'd rather plan around than care for. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the sunlight on my kitchen floor, and I thought about all the years that came before that text. All the help. All the sacrifices. All the times I'd stepped in quietly without keeping score, and then I typed 2 words. Okay. That was it. No explanation, no emotion, just okay. What my son didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that in that moment something shifted inside me. Not anger, not revenge, clarity. If he didn't want the responsibility of caring for me someday, then he didn't get to benefit from what I'd spent a lifetime building. Those 2 things don't exist separately. You don't get independence without consequences. You don't reject responsibility and still expect reward. That afternoon, I made a call, not to my son, to my attorney. And with that single phone call, I made a quiet decision that would unravel everything my son thought was guaranteed. What happened after that text, what he said when he realized what I'd done, and how far he was willing to go to stop me, that's where this story really begins. That phone call with my attorney ended quietly. No drama, no raised voices, just a calm confirmation that he could see me later that week. I thanked him, hung up, and sat at my kitchen table longer than I planned to. It was strange how peaceful I felt. Not relieved, not angry, just clear. That text message had peeled something back. Like lifting a corner of wallpaper you didn't realize was hiding cracks underneath. Once you see it, you can't pretend the wall is solid anymore. I started thinking about the last few years, not emotionally, practically. How often Matthew called, what those calls were usually about. The timing, the tone. It was uncomfortable, but I forced myself to stay honest. At first, I told myself I was just being a good mother. Helping when I could, being there, that's what we're supposed to do, right? But once that text landed in my hands, those memories rearranged themselves. The emergencies, the temporary situations, the way conversations drifted toward my finances without ever asking directly. I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out my bank statements, not out of panic, out of curiosity. I lined them up on the dining table and grabbed a pen. There was the money for the roof repair, the short-term loan that was never mentioned again, the help with school tuition that somehow became ongoing. Each one had felt reasonable on its own. Together, they told a story I hadn't wanted to read. I totaled it carefully, double-checking the numbers because part of me still hoped I was wrong. I wasn't. Over the last 4 years, I had quietly transferred tens of thousands of dollars. Not once had I been asked how I was doing. Not once had anyone suggested I slow down or think about myself. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, and that's when something else hit me. Matthew had access to my accounts. Years ago, after my husband passed, we'd set up a joint account just in case. It was supposed to be temporary, a safety net, something I never needed and eventually forgot about, but he hadn't forgotten. Which meant he'd seen the transfer to my attorney, which meant he already knew something was happening. My phone buzzed just as that thought crossed my mind. Matthew, I let it ring. Not because I was being petty, but because I needed to hear my own thoughts before I heard his voice. When I finally answered, his tone was tight, controlled, not concerned. "What's going on, Mom?" I smiled faintly to myself. Not because anything was funny, but because the question wasn't, "Are you okay?" or "Did something happen?" It was, "What's going on?" As in, I asked calmly. "I saw a charge from a law office. Why are you meeting with a lawyer?" There it was. "Not worry, surveillance. I'm updating my estate planning," I said. "Routine." Silence, then a sharp exhale. "You can't just do that without talking to me." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Matthew," I said evenly, "it's my will. But I'm your son." "Yes," I replied. "And last time I checked, being someone's child doesn't give you ownership over their future." His voice hardened. "You're acting strange. Are you being influenced by someone?" That's when I realized something important. He wasn't afraid for me, he was afraid of losing something he already considered his. I ended the call shortly after that, politely, calmly. My hands didn't shake when I set the phone down, but my resolve had hardened. That night I didn't sleep much, not because I was scared, but because I kept asking myself the same question over and over. How long had he been planning his independence, while counting on my dependence? And as I lay there in the dark, another realization settled in. If Matthew was already reacting this way over a single attorney visit, what would he do once he discovered what I'd actually decided to change? Because the truth was, I wasn't just revising paperwork anymore. I was about to protect everything. And when my son found out how permanent my decision really was, he wouldn't stay calm for long. I didn't tell Matthew about my appointment. I didn't warn him. I didn't hint. I didn't explain myself to anyone. For the first time in a long while, I moved quietly, not out of fear, but intention. When I walked into James Whitman's office 2 days later, I felt steady. The kind of steady that comes when you finally stop arguing with reality. He greeted me warmly, the same way he had years ago when my husband passed, but this time I noticed something different in myself. I wasn't grieving, I was planning. James listened without interrupting as I explained the text message. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't soften it either. I simply handed him my phone and let him read it himself. He didn't rush to speak afterward. That silence told me everything. "You're not overreacting," he finally said. "You're responding." That distinction mattered more than he probably realized. I told him exactly what I wanted. No confusion. No hesitation. A living trust. Immediate asset protection. Clear beneficiaries. No room for interpretation. No loopholes. He raised one careful question. "Are you prepared for how your son may react when he realizes what this means?" I nodded. "I already know how he reacts when he thinks something is being taken from him." James didn't argue, he just started taking notes. When I left his office an hour later, my future was no longer theoretical. It was documented, but what I still didn't know, what would have shocked me if I had, was that Matthew had been watching. That old joint account, he hadn't just glanced at it now and then. He monitored it. Which meant that the moment the account activity changed, the moment the transfers began, the moment control slipped through his fingers, he would notice. And notice he did. My phone rang that evening while I was making dinner. I didn't answer. It rang again and again. By the fourth call, I finally picked up. Where did the money go? No hello, no concern, just accusation. I turned the stove off and sat down. "It's being managed appropriately," I said calmly. "You moved it." "You moved everything," he snapped. "The account is empty." "Yes," I replied, "because it was time." "Time for what?" he demanded. "To punish me?" There it was, not confusion, not hurt, punishment. "This isn't about you," I said quietly. "It's about me." "You can't do this," he said. "That money was supposed to," he stopped himself, "but it was too late." "Supposed to what, Matthew?" I asked. Silence. That silence told me more than any confession ever could. "I'm protecting my future," I continued. "The same way you said you were protecting yours." His voice dropped, cold and sharp. "You're making a huge mistake." "No," I said. "I corrected one." I ended the call before he could say anything else. I sat there in the quiet kitchen afterward, heart steady, hands still. I should have felt scared. Instead, I felt prepared. Because when people realize they're losing access to something they feel entitled to, they don't reason. They escalate. And deep down, I knew something else too. Matthew wasn't done, not even close. The next time he showed up, he wouldn't come alone. I slept surprisingly well that night. That might sound strange considering everything that was unfolding, but once you stop lying to yourself, your body seems to relax. I woke up early, went for my usual walk, watered my plants, and tried to keep the day normal. But calm has a way of provoking people who depend on chaos. By mid-afternoon, I noticed a car slow down in front of my house, then stop. I didn't need to look twice. Matthew stepped out first, his posture stiff, jaw tight, and then from the passenger side, Rachel got out, my daughter-in-law. Together, I didn't rush to the door. I watched through the window as they stood there for a moment, clearly rehearsing whatever they'd decided to say. Rachel adjusted her coat. Matthew rubbed his hands together like he was trying to work up the nerve. That's when I knew this wasn't a conversation. It was a strategy. The knock was firm, not polite, not aggressive, just confident like they belonged there. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Mom," Matthew said quickly, forcing a smile. "We need to talk." "I'm sure you do," I replied, "but not here." Rachel stepped forward, her voice soft, concerned, the way people sound when they're pretending to care. "Eleanor, we're worried about you. These sudden decisions, moving money, closing accounts, it's not like you." I looked at her for a long moment. "You've known me for 12 years, I said. "I've been like this the whole time. You just didn't notice because I never said no." Matthew sighed dramatically. "This isn't about that," he said. "You're acting impulsive. You didn't even talk to us." I wasn't aware I needed permission. Rachel's smile tightened. "We're family," she said. "Big decisions should be discussed." "Funny," I replied, because my future care was apparently decided without any discussion at all. That landed. Matthew's face flushed. "You're twisting my words." "I'm repeating them." Silence hung between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Then Rachel shifted tactics. "Eleanor," she said gently, "people your age can be vulnerable. Stress, grief, it can cloud judgment. We just want to make sure no one is taking advantage of you." There it was, the implication, not concern, control. I felt something cold settle in my chest, but my voice stayed even. "Are you suggesting I'm not competent?" "No, of course not," Matthew said too quickly. "We're just saying maybe you shouldn't make permanent decisions right now." Permanent, that word scared him. I stepped back slightly and folded my arms. "I've documented every decision. I've spoken with my attorney. I've had my health evaluated recently. Everything is in order." Rachel's eyes flicked to Matthew. A silent conversation passed between them. Matthew leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "If you don't reverse this," he said, "we'll have no choice but to protect ourselves." "From what?" "From being cut out unfairly." I almost laughed. "Unfairly?" "Matthew," I said, "you told me not to rely on you. I listened. This is what listening looks like." Rachel dropped the gentle act. "You're being selfish," she snapped. "You have more than enough." "This is about control." "No," I said quietly, "this is about boundaries." Matthew's patience finally cracked. "You think you can just walk away from us?" he said. "From your grandchildren?" That word hit harder than anything else. I held his gaze. "Don't use them," I warned. But the look on his face told me he already planned to. They left shortly after, not defeated, not calm, threatened. As I closed the door, my hands trembled for the first time. Not because I was weak, because I knew what came next. People who feel entitled don't let go easily. They escalate, they rewrite narratives, they look for leverage. And as I stood alone in my hallway, I realized something terrifying. Matthew and Rachel weren't done trying to control my future. They were just getting started. That night, I didn't pretend everything was fine. I locked my doors. I checked my windows. I sat at my kitchen table long after the house went quiet, replaying every word they'd said, not the shouting, not the accusations. The implications? Rachel hadn't questioned my choices. She'd questioned my capacity. And once someone starts planting that idea, it doesn't stay a suggestion for long. The next morning, I called James Whitman before I even finished my coffee. "They're going to challenge this," I said the moment he answered. "Not emotionally, legally." He didn't sound surprised. "I assumed they would," he replied. "Which is why we need to move faster now." By noon, I was back in his office. We went over everything, the trust documents, my medical records, my financial history. He asked questions that weren't comfortable, but they were necessary. "Have you noticed anyone monitoring your behavior? Any pressure to change your decisions? Any threats, direct or implied?" "Yes," I said. "All of the above." James nodded and slid a folder toward me. "Then we prepare." That's when I learned something that made my stomach tighten. Matthew didn't just disagree with my decision, he was building a case. James explained it calmly, like a man who had seen this play out too many times. When adult children lose access to expected inheritance, he said, some try to regain control by questioning competency. They don't need proof, they just need to create doubt. Guardianship, court evaluations, temporary freezes, words I'd only heard in other people's nightmares. If they succeed even briefly, James continued, they could delay or reverse what you've done. That was the moment fear finally caught up with me. Not fear of losing money, fear of losing agency. My life, my decisions, my voice. So what do? I asked. We document everything, he said, and we get ahead of them. That afternoon, I did something I never imagined needing to do with my own child. I started a paper trail, dates, times, exact words, the text message, the visit, the implication that I wasn't competent. I gathered medical records from my doctor, letters confirming my health, my independence, my mental clarity. I backed up every file digitally and placed physical copies in a secure location. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being prepared. Because when people realize manipulation isn't working, they don't stop. They weaponize systems. 2 days later, the letter arrived. Certified mail, my name typed formally across the front. I knew before I opened it. It was from an attorney, their attorney. The language was polite, professional, cold. They were requesting an independent evaluation of my mental fitness due to recent erratic financial behavior and concerns expressed by immediate family members. I sat there, holding that letter, feeling something unexpected rise up inside me. Not panic, anger, controlled, focused, sharp. They weren't just challenging my decisions anymore, they were trying to take my identity. I folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table, then I picked up my phone and called James. It started, I said. Yes, he replied calmly, and now they've made a mistake. What mistake? They put everything in writing. I hung up and looked around my home, the walls I'd painted myself, the furniture my husband and I had chosen together, the life I'd built quietly, responsibly, without ever asking for applause. They thought I'd panic, they thought I'd back down, but they didn't understand something. I wasn't fighting to punish them. I was fighting to exist on my own terms. And the next step, the one they wouldn't expect, I was about to prove publicly, legally, and unmistakably that I was stronger, sharper, and more capable than they ever wanted me to be. And once that happened, there would be no way back for them. I agreed to the evaluation, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. That decision alone caught Matthew and Rachel off guard. People who try to seize control expect resistance, panic, excuses. They don't expect confidence. James arranged everything. A court-approved specialist, neutral location, full documentation, no room for spin. When I walked into that office, I wasn't trembling. I wasn't defensive. I was calm in a way that only comes when you know the truth is on your side. The evaluation lasted hours. Questions about my daily routine, my finances, my memories, my reasoning behind every decision I'd made, I answered clearly, thoughtfully, without rushing. At one point, the evaluator looked up from her notes and asked, "Why did you change your estate plan now?" I didn't hesitate. "Because my son told me not to rely on him when I'm old," I said. I respected that and I adjusted my life accordingly. She paused, then nodded. When it was over, she shook my hand. "You're one of the most prepared people I've evaluated," she said. "Whatever anyone is claiming about you doesn't match reality." I left that building lighter than I'd felt in months. 3 days later, the report was filed. Clear, direct, unambiguous, sound mind, full capacity, independent decision-making. No evidence of coercion or impairment. James called me the moment it hit the court system. "They lost," he said simply, but Matthew and Rachel didn't know that yet. I found out they'd received the notice the same way I'd found out about everything else, through escalation. Matthew showed up at my house again, alone this time. He didn't knock, he pounded. When I opened the door, his face was pale, eyes darting like he was searching for a way out of something already collapsing. "You did this on purpose," he said. "No," I replied calmly. "I did this correctly." "You embarrassed us," he snapped. "Do you know how this looks?" That word again. Looks, not truth, not facts, just appearances. "I didn't involve anyone," I said. "You did." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing my porch. "Rachel is furious," he muttered. "She says you've turned this into a war." I met his eyes. You brought lawyers into my life, you questioned my sanity, what did you expect? For the first time, something cracked. Do you know how much pressure we're under? He blurted. We've made plans, we counted on things. He stopped. I didn't interrupt. Didn't need to. He'd finally said the quiet part out loud. You counted on my death, I said. His mouth opened, then closed. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Silence stretched between us. Then his voice dropped, almost desperate. If you don't change this, everything falls apart. I studied him, not with anger, with clarity. Matthew, I said softly, anything that collapses because it depended on someone else's life ending deserves to. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore, and maybe he didn't. Because the woman standing in front of him wasn't afraid, wasn't apologizing, wasn't negotiating her dignity. He left without another word. That night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the framed photos on my wall. Birthday parties, graduations, smiling faces that didn't tell the whole story. I felt grief, yes, but I also felt something else, something steady. I had survived their strongest move, the legal threat, the competency challenge, the attempt to take my voice, and now they were cornered, which meant only one thing: people who lose control don't suddenly become reasonable. They reach for the last weapon they have left, and I knew exactly what that would be. They were going to use the one thing they knew could still hurt me, my grandchildren. I knew it before it happened. When Matthew walked away from my porch that day, defeated and exposed, I felt it in my bones. He wasn't done, he was desperate. And desperate people don't suddenly grow a conscience. They look for leverage. 3 days passed in silence. No calls, no messages, no lawyers. The quiet was unsettling. On the 4th day, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Almost. This is Mrs. Brooks? A woman asked. Yes, my name is Karen. I'm calling regarding Noah and Lily. My chest tightened. I'm a court-appointed family services coordinator. Your son and daughter-in-law have requested a modification to visitation arrangements. Visitation. That word landed like a blow. They've decided, she continued carefully, that it may not be emotionally healthy for the children to maintain contact with you at this time. I closed my eyes. There it was, the final weapon. What reason did they give? I asked. A pause. They expressed concerns about conflict and influence. Influence, not safety, not neglect. Influence. They're using the children to punish me, I said quietly. Another pause. I can't comment on motives, she replied. But I am required to inform you that unless challenged, this request will take effect immediately. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat perfectly still at my kitchen table. For the first time since all of this began, tears welled up. Not for myself, for Noah and Lily, for their confused faces. For questions no one would answer honestly. For being turned into bargaining chips by their own parents. I cried for exactly 5 minutes, then I wiped my face and made another call. To James. They've cut me off from the kids, I said. I suspected they might, he replied calmly. And that's why I prepared something? Within hours, he was at my house with a folder. Inside were documents I hadn't known existed, legal filings, timelines, records of threats, the attempted competency challenge, and the implied coercion. This, he said, tapping the folder, is why they've just made a serious mistake. I learned something that day. Using children as leverage doesn't just make you cruel, it makes you legally reckless. James explained it plainly. When parents restrict grandparent contact as retaliation or coercion, he said, courts don't look kindly on it, especially when there's documented evidence of manipulation. So what happens now? I asked. Now, he said, we don't react emotionally, we respond strategically. The next morning, a formal notice was filed, not demanding custody, not demanding control. Simply requesting supervised visitation, citing emotional harm caused by sudden separation and documented attempts at coercion. Matthew and Rachel must have panicked when they received it. Because that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Matthew. Why would you do this? He demanded. Why are you dragging the kids into court? I almost laughed. You already did, I said. I'm just refusing to let them be used. This is going too far, he snapped. You're ruining everything? No, I replied. I'm ending it. The hearing was scheduled quickly. Family court moves fast when children are involved. I sat across from Matthew and Rachel in that small room, watching them avoid my eyes. Rachel clutched Matthew's arm like she always did when she felt cornered. The mediator asked simple questions. Why the sudden cutoff? Why now? Why after the estate dispute? Their answers were thin, inconsistent, defensive, transparent. Then James spoke. He presented the timeline, the text message, the financial pressure, the legal threats, the failed competency challenge, and finally the sudden denial of access to the children. The room went quiet. The mediator leaned back and sighed. This appears retaliatory, she said. Rachel's face drained of color. The decision was swift. Supervised visitation was granted, limited, structured, court-monitored. Not because I demanded it, but because the system recognized manipulation when it saw it. When I saw Noah and Lily again, weeks later, they ran into my arms like no time had passed at all. "Grandma," Lily whispered, hugging me tight. "I missed you." "I missed you too," I said, holding her as carefully as if she were made of glass. Matthew watched from across the room. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked scared. Because for the first time, he understood something he'd never planned for. He had lost control, and I hadn't raised my voice once. Life didn't snap back to normal after that. It settled into something quieter, smaller, more intentional. The supervised visits continued once a month. Noah and Lily adjusted faster than the adults ever did. Children are like that, resilient, honest, present. We baked cookies, we read books. We talked about school and scraped knees and favorite colors. I never spoke badly about their parents, not once. Because this story was never about revenge. It was about boundaries. Matthew stopped calling altogether. Rachel never tried again. The lawyers faded out of my life the same way they'd entered it, efficiently, without ceremony. The trust remained intact. My decisions stood. And slowly, something unexpected happened. I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from choosing yourself after a lifetime of choosing everyone else first. I stayed active. I volunteered. I traveled with friends. I filled my home with people who wanted me, not what I represented on paper. I laughed more. I slept better. My doctor told me I'd never looked healthier. One afternoon, while walking through my garden, I realized something that stopped me in my tracks. I wasn't afraid of aging anymore. Because I wasn't alone, I was supported, just not by the people I'd once assumed I would be. And that's the lesson I want to leave you with. Blood does not entitle anyone to your sacrifice. Love does not require self-erasure. And setting boundaries does not make you cruel, it makes you free. If someone tells you who they are, believe them. And if someone tells you they won't be there for you, listen. Then build a life that doesn't depend on people who see you as a burden, a backup plan, or a payday. You deserve dignity. At every age, in every season of life. So let me ask you, what would you have done? If this story spoke to you, please like and subscribe for more real stories about family, strength, and self-respect. And if you've ever faced something similar, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. Thank you for listening to my story.